Hello, my name is Carly Ham.
I'm Brandis Paisley.
And today is May 11th, 2011. We are at the Cambridge Narrows Regional Library to interview Don Bremner. Our hopes are that you enjoy listening to our interview. The house known locally as the Dr.MacDonald house is a lovely late Victorian building on a hill overlooking Washmoyne Lake at Cambridge Narrows. It is a graceful, colorful, well-maintained home cherished by its current owners. Was Dr. MacDonald the first one to own the property or in the house?
He wasn't the first to own the property. The person that owned him directly before Dr. MacDonald was Dr. William Bell Little and his family. The little house in the photograph behind the Dr. MacDonald house was the Little house, but that was torn down shortly after Dr. MacDonald built his big house a little closer to the road.
What do you know about Dr. MacDonald?
Oh, I know a good deal about Dr. MacDonald. For one thing, our Queens County Heritage has Dr. MacDonald's day books, his journals from about 1867 until 1916. So going through those, we've learned a great deal about Dr. MacDonald and his lifestyle. MacDonald is a very interesting person and quite an important person in Cambridge Narrows and in the Washmoyne area. His mother and father were Alexander Black MacDonald and Janet Hendry MacDonald. Janet was a diarist. She kept diaries of her life, etc. So we know quite a bit about Malcolm from the time he was young. He went to school at Central Cambridge. After he finished school, he went and taught school for about 3 years to get some money together. And then he went to Harvard to study medicine. That he graduated from Harvard in April 1865, came home to the family farm, and his mother in her diary says, Malcolm came home from Boston today. He has a dreadful cold and a cough. But by May, he's feeling better, obviously. And she records in her diary, James, who was Malcolm's older brother, took Malcolm up to Cambridge today to begin his life's work. And of course, his life's work was going to be as a doctor. He came up here, he boarded with the Marcus Cox family and practiced medicine. In his day books, which we have at our museum, he records the people that he treated and how much it cost. He doesn't say anything about what was wrong with them. He just puts down their name and the amount of money that he gave, that they paid to him. And, you know, as the day books go on, he gets more and more and more patients, so that he only has, maybe 30 people in the 1860s each month. And by the time of the 1890s, he has twice that many at least, maybe more. He obviously enjoyed his work, and he lived with the Cox family. Then after Marcus Cox died, he was an old gentleman. We have a photograph of a painting of him at our museum as well. Then Malcolm married one of the Cox daughters, Huldah. They were older when they were married, that he was 56 and Huldah was 50. But shortly after that, he decided he was going to build her a house. Now, he built a barn first. You can see the barn. I'm sure you'll photograph it down there beside his house. Like a man, he built the barn first. But then in 1897, he started to build a house for he and Huldah. And an amazingly big house for two people. But that was the style at the time. He was a very prosperous gentleman. He could afford to have a big house, and so he built it. And in the day books, he mentions everything that went into that house and everybody that worked for him and how much they were paid. A lot of local men worked on it. Rainsford Coase was the foreman, and he worked there most and was paid most. But all the local guys helped. That they hauled up lumber from the wharf, because of course a lot of the supplies came by riverboat up to the wharf, which was just down the hill down at the foot of the hill from his house. And he got bricks and clapboards and lime mortar and locks from Thorne Company in St. John, and just everything that you would need to build a house. And he did build, or supervised and paid for, a very, very fine home. And one of the things that he entered in the book was he paid $3.60 for pictures of the house. And we would love to have those pictures, but they haven't turned up yet. So he and Hulda moved into that house, and he practiced medicine there up until his passing in September 1916.
Did Dr. MacDonald have a family?
Yes, sort of. He and Hilda were older when they married, so they didn't have children of their own. But in the 1890s, they adopted a little girl. Her name was Florence. And the story of Florence is rather sad, that her father was a Mr. Thorne, and her mother had been a black. And they were married in 1890, but in 1896 there was a family tragedy, that they were burning grass, and somehow or other Mrs. Thorne's dress caught fire, and she was badly, badly burned, and she died. At that point they had 5 little kids. And the father, and you can understand it happening, he was just devastated, absolutely blown away by this. He wasn't able to cope with his children, with his family, and he simply disappeared. And we found out after, other people found out, it seemed the children were abandoned, but he was actually in the mental hospital, that he, the death of his wife was more than he could handle. And, makes you feel sad. But the children were adopted, or were not actually adopted, but were parceled out to relatives and whatever. And Dr. MacDonald and Hulda took in Florence, who was about 3 years old at the time. And she became, you might imagine, she became the light of their life, that Florence was a very important little person in their life. And she lived there until she was older, and then she married a Mr. Campbell. She had 2 children, and her little boy's name was Malcolm. I wonder why. So that was his family, and of course he had brothers and sisters, and a couple of brothers were quite important. One of them, dearly beloved gentleman, the same as Dr. MacDonald, was the Reverend Alexander Black MacDonald, his next oldest brother, because he was a Baptist minister for about 50 years here in the community. And in the day book, we find that Malcolm buys a horse for Black, which is, he was a very prosperous person. Baptist ministers aren't generally very, very well-to-do, and so he bought him a new horse, which is really neat. And then he had a brother, William, who also went to the States to study. But William took dentistry, and he practiced in Boston. But he came home each summer to see his parents. And then after his parents were gone, he would come home. And he still lived in Boston all his life, but he would come home after he'd retired from dentistry. He would come home every summer and spend the summer down beside the lake at central Cambridge. He lived to be 101. And we have pictures of his 100th birthday party, and of Dr. MacDonald sitting in a rocking chair similar to this one, with a very long beard and looking very well, very solemn. But he was another one of Malcolm's brothers. And there were some others that kept, a couple of them ran a mill. He had a sister, Susan.
How many times has this house been sold, and who has lived in it?
It's changed hands quite a few times. After Dr. MacDonald died in 1916, his wife lived there for quite a long time after that, and Florence lived there as well. And then I believe it sat empty for quite a while. Then Mr. Andy Turnbull bought it, and he and Doris lived there for a good many years. And he did a lot of the restoration, and it wasn't in terribly bad shape, but he did a lot of restoration and restored it pretty much to the way it would have looked initially, which was really very nice indeed. And after Andy, then I believe the Fowlers, the people that live there now, bought it from him. But it's a very nice home, very, very nice house to live in.
Have you ever been in the house?
Yes, I was in it a time or two when Andy lived there. But shortly after he moved in, all of the MacDonald things were still there. There were trunks and books and papers and everything that the attic and the woodshed and everything was just full of interesting old things. So there was an auction at that house. And I was at the auction, as were many other people. And that's one of the reasons that we have so much material about Dr. MacDonald. Now, at that auction, one of the things I bought was a pastel drawing of an elderly gentleman with a beard. And, they told us, and indeed it was, Dr. MacDonald. So we have that at the museum. Also, the day books that we have, one of our Queens County Heritage members had bought those at that auction and kept them for a while and then gave them to us for the museum. So the day of the auction, of course, we were all in the house, going through the house and the sheds, and it really is a beautiful house inside. And the carriage house behind it, where Dr. MacDonald kept his horses and carriage, and then the barn, are very, very interesting buildings architecturally. And again, locally made by local people working here. Okay.
What else have you learned about Dr. MacDonald from the day books that are housed at the museum?
Oh my, we learned a lot of things about Dr. MacDonald from those day books. For instance, in those days, lots of times he didn't get paid cash, that he got paid in kind with things like chickens or oats for his horses, or someone at one point records that Mrs. Gibson gave him 6 sheep, which were worth $20, and he turned around and sold them about less than a month later to John Caldwell for $24. So he made a little bit on that exchange. We learned about his expenses. The school tax in 1904, for instance, was $12.04. He gave a donation to someone that was begging of 30 cents. He did many, many other things. We mentioned Florence, and he bought things for Florence, of course. And before he was married, he records that he bought a new suit, that he bought new boots, he bought a shirt and collars. In those days, it cost him $1 to go to St. John on the boat, and $1 to come back. His house was very well supplied with magazines and things. That he subscribed to the Telegraph Journal. It cost him $5 a year. Now it costs almost $200 a year. He subscribed to the Messenger and Christian Visitor, and to the Queens County Gazette, which recorded all sorts of things. And he subscribed to a weekly paper for Florence, something called Little Folks. And he bought other books, like Mrs. Lizzie Palmer's poems and History of the Baptists. I mentioned that he bought a horse for his brother. Some of his other expenses were to the drug companies in St. John, for instance, that he ordered medicines from Hannington's and from Pendleton's, who were wholesale drug companies in St. John. So his medicines would come up, and when you went to the doctor, he would prescribe pills or tonic, something like that for you. Again, we talked about the kinds of expenses that he had on his house. Those are some of the things. And I'm sure there were many other things too. We were able to tell from some of this how much ordinary things cost at the store, things like that. Also, the other useful thing were in the lists of patients. Because, for instance, if you were doing family research and you didn't know whether your family was living here in the 1890s, and you start reading through his list of patients, and you discover, oh yes, that Mary Chase is living here, and that Conrad Strait is living here, and that, oh my goodness, I didn't know the Babingtons ever lived in this community, but there he's treating Mrs. So-and-so. Maybe she was visiting here, but there she is in Dr. MacDonald's daybook.
Was there any information recorded about any special events or special celebrations?
Yes, there were some things recorded. I'm not sure whether much of this took place at his house. They don't say things like, so-and-so was here for dinner, which a lot of diaries do say. But he was certainly a sociable, outgoing gentleman. He frequently went to pie socials and concerts and things like that. And when he bought a basket or something, he records it in his expenses that he might have paid somewhere between $1 or $3 for a basket or a pie. He often attended concerts and birthday parties. The birthday parties seemed to be house parties at various sorts, and he gave birthday presents to his wife's nieces and nephews, for instance, of which there were several. He attended liberal conventions and nominating conventions. He was a Freemason. He was a very fine supporter of the Baptist Church. Because he'd been brought up in the Baptist Church, and certainly his brother was an influence on him. In one instance, he made a donation for lamps for the new meeting house at Salmon Creek. Very generous of him. Something else that's